think we should get started because we have so much to cover. Welcome to the Tory Burch webinar series. I'm Lori Fabiano, the president of Tory Burch. Just a reminder, be sure to ask questions in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. We had a number of people sending questions ahead of time and we'll be sure to get to those as well. We are thrilled to have Shama Maher with us today to discuss how to manage and scale your supply chain. Shama has all-around experience in the retail industry. She is the CEO and founder of Scaling Retail, an international fashion retail consultancy. She has previously worked for Gucci's, Macy's, Barney's, and an entrepreneur herself. Shama launched Rendell Company in 2020, a high-volume mass business that won the Stevie Award for fastest growing startup. She is a featured Forbes contributor and has been named one of WWD's top 20 women in business. Welcome, Shama, and we're going to dive right in. So over to you.
Fantastic. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. What a treat. Let me go ahead and pop on my screen share. We've got so much to cover in such a short period of time. So I'm going to do my best to speak lean and quickly and hopefully get a chance to spend a lot of time focusing on your questions. Obviously, there are so many things when it comes to supply chain. And really, one of the things that I thought was just so interesting in preparing for today was just quite frankly, how everyone is in the business of supply chain, even though we don't actually recognize it all the time. So wherever you are in your business, today is going to be such a valuable conversation for you. So Lori did such a great job of introducing myself as far as the background, the company that I manage. I am also, in addition to running Scaling Retail and Rental Co., I'm also an investor, I'm a speaker, I'm a writer, I'm also a retail nerd. I'm that girl at 9 years old who wrote that paper on why things went on sale at Macy's. I was looking at the job boards of LVMH when I was in high school. So when it comes to someone who knew what path they were on in the industry they wanted to be in, that was me. Took no shortcuts, went straight to it. And today I'm happy to share with you my experiences around this industry and really how you guys can walk away with some very actionable strategies on being able to establish and then really scale your supply chain. Now, what's really fascinating about this as we start to look at the way in which our businesses can really look at uncertainty, supply chain plays such a big factor in that. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's unpack what uncertainty is. Let's unpack what the roles of supply chains are within your business models. So, supply chain 101. Starting for the basics from some of you, but most of you guys might be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that supply chain was such a 360-degree concept. In fact, as you see here in our definition, we look at supply chain not just from the perspective of your producers, the vendors, the warehouses, the transportation companies, distribution centers, and your retailers, but the functions in your supply chains, which end up being your product development, your marketing, your operations, your distribution, finance, and customer service. In essence, guys, if you have a business, you are managing your supply chain. If you are a business of one, you are managing sourcing, distribution, all of that in and of your business. If you are a business of 20, you have scaled up your supply chain. So what I want to start off by understanding is that by looking at the ways in which we are approaching our operations, our business building, and our foundation, we can actually set up our businesses to scale in a way that allows us to be more profitable. Now, what's interesting about profitability and supply chain management is as a small startup, right, when we're businesses of 1 and 2, we tend to think about these different pain points, right? What do we need? How do we need to build these businesses? What are the things that we need to scale? But yet we're such a small entity. And so today, my goal is to really impart with you guys not only some of the building blocks of how to set up a scalable supply chain management system, but also the ways to evaluate those systems and the ways to start to look at reinvesting your cash flow and your capital. I'm a huge fan of you want to start the way you want to finish. So I'm so thrilled to have many of you guys here today who are interested in understanding what I believe to be the sexiest part of our industry, which is making money, right? Many of us love the product. I love the product too, but we're all in business to be able to scale and to be able to have regenerative resources. So as we look at supply chain management, the number one thing I want you guys to take away with is until you have a director of operations or a chief operating officer, you yourself as the founder and the CEO of your business are managing all of the different ways in which your business gets lubricated, reinvested into, ultimately with the goal to scale. So as we jump into this, what I want us to really pay a little bit of attention to here is how and where we want to grow. It's easy for me to jump in and say, hey guys, let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to get to $25 million eventually. But how do we actually want to look at our back of napkin 5-year planning? So what I would encourage everyone to do for the next 1 minute or so is to take a second to write down what your revenue or KPI target might be in the next 5 years. That can range from a number of different things, right? Your 5-year KPI target might be something along the lines of growing to $1 million. It might be growing to $10 million. It might be being able to maximize certain kinds of KPIs that are not revenue based. You might be looking at increasing in the next 5 years your return customer rate. You might be looking at decreasing your returns, right? All of those become functions of revenue targets. But I really want all of you guys to come into this workshop today with understanding where you want to be. I often find that when we take a look at where we want to go to, everything else becomes an operational flow chart of how to work backwards. And as we all know, there are 2 different ways of growing your business, and we have to look at both: the bottoms up planning and then our tops down planning. And in the business of supply chain management and business building and sales acceleration, we want to be working within these 2 different mediums. When I think of my 5-year plan and I say I want to grow a business to $5 million, that gives me an idea of what kinds of levers I need to pull. Then I can look backwards and say, where are my capital investments today? What is my manpower like? And how can I start to bridge the gap between where I am and where I'd like to be? Similarly, with this 5-year planning, you might also say, I want to build a business to get acquired. I want to build a business for an exit strategy. And that might be more of your 10-year planning. So in this 5-year stage, what I'm hoping you guys are able to identify are some key areas of financial revenue targets or KPIs, and take that in your mind as we move through the rest of today's presentation. Because the goal here is to be able to walk away with the opportunity to say, this is where I'd like to be. These are my operations today, and here is how I look to bridge the gap. I hope lots of questions come in today as we start to look at business building and scalability. So how do we start to get to these 5-year targets? One of my favorite books is by Jim Collins, and it's called Good to Great. Many of you guys might be familiar with his work. He's a fantastic author who's been behind the scenes of a number of really interesting businesses, including Google and many of our favorites, as we look at operations and how businesses have been able to scale. And my favorite definition and framework that Jim Collins has espoused and identified is the establishment of what we like to call a flywheel. Now, we all know within business and in operational management that it's not just making the big wins, right? It is really doing these little tiny tasks over and over again that will ultimately lead to big success. quite frankly, what that means is it's not going to be the $5,000 ad campaign that you throw into this marketing initiative that's going to get you to where you want to be. And it's not just going to be that amazing operational hire who came from all these big businesses to help you reach your goals. It's going to be the internal processes that you guys establish as the baseline of your organization that you do on a daily basis. Some of you guys who come from the world of finance might understand this in the terms of compounding, right? It is the little things that we do every single day that actually help us reach those bigger wins. It's not often the big thing that we do. So in this version of us getting to your 5-year revenue target, one of the first things we want to identify are where is the flywheel within your organization, right? What are the series of functions and steps that need to get done in order to have your customer journey be right? And so for our purposes, we'll look at it in terms of your marketing flywheel, which today we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on, but marketing is certainly part of the supply chain ecosystem. And then your supply chain management flywheel. And within supply chain management, we're going to focus on how we look at customer service, procurement, 3PLs, the systems and the processes to be able to identify these partners, manage these partners, and then reevaluate and assess when we actually need to change over our partners. Here's something that I find is also very interesting. Oftentimes in the early stages of a business, especially when we're solo founders, we can find ourselves being so excited that people want to be enlisted and enrolled into our vision. Oh my God, this person wants to work for me. That's so amazing. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm able to get these new hires who believe in my vision and who actually want to work for me as a leader. Those are great things, right? It is fantastic and wonderful for you to have the opportunity to be able to work with people who are so enthusiastic. However, the people who you start with are often not always the people who you end up sticking around with 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years down the road. And why is that? Your business needs change. Who you are as a leader evolves. Your understanding of your product market fit, your pivoting happens, everything happens within those first few years that really helps you to align your own leadership skills with the right people, partnerships, and systems that eventually get to be scaled up. But these first few years of this journey of your business is really about the hypothesis, the iteration, and establishing what your product market fit is, and also what your leadership culture and partnership fit is. And today, as we take a look at supply chain, which is certainly all encompassing, what we'll find, and I'm going to cut to the chase here, is that your partnerships and your people and the entire ecosystems are very relational, and we treat them like family because ultimately we grow with them, right? Our family comes in and out, the people in our lives change, but we want to build ecosystems that are scalable and that we can grow with. So in the establishment of looking at your flywheel, we then have to ask ourselves, how do we have examples of these flywheels and how do we actually start to map out these processes? These processes ultimately become the linchpin of how you identify areas of your business that need to be improved on and iterated on. One of my favorite examples of a flywheel comes from Jim Collins and his example at Amazon, right? You can see here in the flywheel, these are quite simply the things that make their business model, when running very efficiently, scalable. Right? So it's nailing down those certain components very, very early on to be able to then add more resources to be able to grow faster. One of the number one things that I often hear from a lot of different startups, and like I mentioned, I do some investing, is, hey, I just need marketing dollars. I just need dollars to be able to grow my business. In fact, what you need oftentimes to pitch is not just I need money to be able to grow, but what you need to be able to do is to identify your supply chain and your flywheel and be able to explain to an investor, to a potential co-founder, to your chief operator, what are the different areas of the business that make your business unique and special, right? What are the different things that you are able to implement to see it grow? And obviously, right, this is not just about getting dollars for marketing, right? When it comes to this actually becomes about getting dollars to be able, oops, I think I went ahead, guys. Sorry about that. When it comes to this, it actually becomes about getting the opportunity to grow your business from the perspective of the linchpin. So my customer service targets are here. I have this kind of relationship with my supplier. I'm able to leverage these kinds of negotiations with my warehouse. I'm now able to take this information and impact how we look at our marketing dollars and our marketing spend, which then is going to impact our customer experience. And we start to build this ecosystem. So as opposed to looking at, let's say, as opposed to looking at this from the perspective of, let's say, a organizational management system from just looking at, let's say, customer service or marketing, what we actually find ourselves doing, right, is taking a look at this from the perspective of all the different pieces that have to come together to be able to make this functional, right? And that is what we're looking at from supply chain management and from our Flywheel example. So the biggest question that I get, and obviously this happens from both startups and then also businesses that are growing, is how do I go ahead and build this, right? What are actually the key components that are going to help me build this business and that I'm actually going to be able to manage it? And what I have found that I actually think is the most, I would say, curious part about this is no one has the right answer from the beginning. And why is that? Well, when it comes to having all the right answers, that means that someone's handed you over the business model, the idea, the product market fit. And basically, you're probably not an entrepreneur at that point, because a huge part of uncovering your business model and a huge part of uncovering what makes your brand fit and thrive in the market are the unique sets of people, products, services, right, and implementation that make your product market fit so unique and special. That I think is important. So when it comes to saying, is there a one-stop shop to be able to implement this? No. And if someone tells you, hey, do these 5 things and do them now, they're not really looking at the intricacies of your business. So much of this is going to be understanding how to think about it, not just where to go and who to work with, but understanding how your business and your model is unique to you and your unique skill sets that you bring to the table is ultimately going to shape kind of the initial rounding of hiring, capacity building, and partnerships that you're working with. Okay, building blocks. I love this. Whenever I say building blocks, I tend to think of things like Legos. I think of like Jenga. I think of like, all the different ways in which we are able to, build. And I guess it's more in terms of like, let's say you can either have the Jenga model, which is like, oh my God, everything's here. How do I make things move? And how do I build it so it doesn't fall apart? Or we can look at it as, those really amazing kids' toys from like Sweden, where they are made of solid wood and we are able to build foundationally, right? And we're able to have something that's sturdy. And having a sturdy business comes from having a sturdy and thoughtful mind, right? Again, it is the way in which we think about business. There are no shortcuts to experience, right? There are no shortcuts to learning. However, there are hacks and there are ways to understand how to learn that optimizes for yourself. And so as you guys are populating into the Q&A and as you guys are looking at ways of how to apply this information, I also will ask you to think about, what are the ways in which you learn the best, right? What are the ways in which you're going to be able to actually absorb the information, take the notes, write the questions, ask them to me, but also be able to apply them. Small or big business, lots of things you can do here to impact how you think and what you do, probably this afternoon, right? Over a glass of wine. Okay, so let's get to it. Building blocks. How do we find partners? Partnership planning in our industry, whether it comes to sourcing materials, whether that comes to sourcing your 3PLs, so your third-party logistics centers, whether that comes to looking at your inventory management systems, Finding partners is a very, very challenging, or used to be a very, very challenging thing for small businesses to have to do. And why is that? Historically, our industry has been a very big black box. People don't talk much, it's hard to find information, and it is very, very challenging and can be challenging to know who to trust, right? Who are the people who can work with businesses your size? So finding partnerships. I'll give a couple great examples. A company of one who's selling their products online by themselves. Maybe it's a handmade product. Maybe they're like, hey, this is my side hustle, but oh my gosh, people are buying my products. Wow, not just my friends, but people are buying my products, right? For me, the ultimate test of a initial business that can actually take up steam is, hey, do other people who don't love me buy my stuff, right? And if people who don't know you and love you buy your stuff, it's kind of a first key indicator that you might be onto something. The moment that you actually start to get outside sales, right? And whether that's through, hopefully this fall, pop-up shops, or hopefully through maybe some initial wholesale tests, or maybe possibly through selling direct to consumer through your website, through Etsy. The moment you start to get some initial feedback, that is the moment that you have to go, holy crap, who am I going to hire and work with to actually get myself to the next level? It is called future forecasting your business model. Just like how we said earlier, what's your 5-year goal? That's super important. That's going to keep you jazzed, and that's going to be the carrot by which you get to your business on a daily basis. However, we have little milestones in between. And that first milestone of, oh my gosh, someone bought my product who I don't know, that basically tells me I need to quickly figure out all of these things that I've been doing on my own. Who can help me? Maybe I can't afford all of them right now. Maybe I can't afford any of them right now. But that is the moment you need to be identifying all of these potential partners. So how do you do that? Well, we are no longer in an industry of giant black boxes. However, many third-party logistics centers, warehouses, distribution centers, even manufacturers tend to not have the easiest, most SEO searchable websites. In fact, some of the best manufacturers don't even have an online presence because it is not their job to be retail or consumer facing. So even still, while we don't have this big black box, when we start to think of the other ways of getting to information, we have things like referrals. So talking and joining communities and networks where you can actually say, hey guys, I'm looking to hire X. I need to find this resource. Who can you recommend? Again, not waiting until the moment where you have to actually hire the person, but actually planning for this in advance, right? Something's happening in my business. Let me think 1 or 2 steps down the road. So getting tapped into communities of entrepreneurs, getting tapped into communities of other business owners, of people who are in your CPG space or whatever industry you are in is super important. Certainly looking at places, for example, of domestic manufacturers. There are companies like Makers Row that do a great job here in the US. But when it comes to looking at international partnerships, you're really going to find the majority of that information through consultants, agencies who are well connected, as well as your networks. And when it comes to vetting those partners, it becomes increasingly important for us to think about how do we actually vet them? How will these people actually help our businesses grow and scale over time? Have they worked with businesses like mine before, right? Then we start to look at things like in their contracts. What are the termination clauses? You don't want to get caught into a 3PL agreement that's going to keep you stuck with them for 12 months on an exclusive clause. So start to take a look and don't just get eager that people are saying yes to you, but really take a look at all of those contracts and clauses to make sure that those systems are able to scale with you accordingly. Don't over-engineer what you need. Make sure that you're thinking down the road 12 months in advance, but that you're also saying, what can I afford and what's going to impact my business today? Now, when it comes to performance tracking and understanding and evaluating those partnerships, the most important thing that you can do when evaluating those partnerships is really going to be the opportunity to look at your key performance indicators and partnership reviews. right? You're going to be reviewing your factories for things like factory performance. You're going to be looking at your 3PL and logistics companies for, are they short shipping? What are the shortages on inventory? What are the lead times to ship? You're also going to be looking at your customer service, which I think is an incredible KPI that most people in the early stages do not pay attention to. What is the lead time to respond, whether that's yourself or the person you've hired? Have you been indexing your customer issues so you actually understand how you need to make improvements into your customer service experience? Customer service is one of the most important things, especially in today's market, that most people do not spend enough time focusing on because they're looking at things like production or marketing. But guys, customer service is what keeps your returning customer rate up and what keeps everything flowing amazingly, right? It's what's going to help you grow. It's that word of mouth. It's that marketing pull. Now we look at ways in which we're able to actually be able to track the data, right? How do we track our partnerships? So oftentimes for many initial businesses, we're looking at things like Microsoft Excel, maybe pulling something into Airtable. And then on the apparel side of things, some of my favorite management systems are things like Apparel Magic, Ames 360, and RLM. Okay, so some things to think about when it comes to looking at opportunities to scale up your business and future goals here when it comes to thinking about scaling up your supply chain and ways of being able to take advantage of that. One of my favorite examples here is when we look at companies that are able to own pieces of their supply chain in-house, what we find is the opportunity to be able to actually increase revenue streams. Now, I'm an entrepreneur. Your first business is not your last business. I truly believe that we are all here to grow. We are here to create regenerative income. And ultimately, we want to be able to have profit maximizing revenue opportunities for ourselves. That might likely be beyond selling your product. My suggestion is to take a look at opportunities for you to own your supply chain later down the road. There is a shortage of third-party logistics centers that are actually geared towards small business. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to own the business, to own a logistics and warehousing company, to provide a service to smaller companies who are looking for a high touch experience but can't afford the overhead of a larger 3PL. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to own the factory because you actually want to be able to produce garments and goods offline when you're not producing your own product. Right? Not only does this allow you to get speed to market for your own product, but now all of a sudden you have additional revenue streams to be able to produce products for other kinds of industries and other kinds of brands. So think about, and I would say as your homework system today, if you're interested in building out your supply chain and you want to be thinking about the largest ways to grow your pie, if you're interested in your product segment, is truly going to be to think about these other verticals that you can kind of grow into over time. Maybe it doesn't make sense to own the retail store yet or own the building to lease out the floors, but maybe you have a small passion or a big passion for commercial real estate. And so over time, as you as the entrepreneur are looking at additional revenue streams, you might actually find it beneficial to eventually own your own building, lease out the storefront to your own company, right? So we have to think about, as women business owners, as women who need to be building regenerative financials for ourselves over time, independence, et cetera, we need to be looking beyond just how do I scale this business, but what are the revenue streams? What are the different ways that I can be making money that can benefit my business and hopefully benefit other businesses along the way? Okay. Other interesting ways of looking at growing your business, right? So when we think about things like, how can I get my manufacturers to invest? How can I think about getting people to be on board, right? Where can I get other investment? I've actually seen some fantastic brand partnerships done with collaborations with manufacturers, right? If you actually need to be able to maybe get better terms on manufacturing or have them thrown out the window, maybe you bring to the table a very interesting connection to retailers and buyers, but you want a company to help you on the back end with product development and manufacturing. Going into these partnerships with your supply chain and being able to have either profit sharing, equity negotiations, to build those foundations can give you a huge, huge leg up over time, right? So start to think about who are the existing partnerships that I have, or who do I know, or ultimately, where do I have my biggest advantages here? And then how can I actually involve my partnerships into taking a more invested approach into my growth? Ultimately, at the end of the day, what's in it for them? Right? How am I able to create a revenue model and a business model that benefits everybody, right? Because at the end of the day, guys, we're building a family. It's not just the team you hire, but it's ultimately going to be the partnerships that you plan for. So as Lori mentioned earlier, I back in April 2020, I launched Rental Co. with a co-founder. And this is a really interesting story. She and I were both coming out of our divorces, and we were like, oh my gosh, we are in the middle of this pandemic. What are we going to do? The whole world seems like it's going crazy. And we were saying, okay, well, she comes to the table with over 15 years of product development experience. I came to the table with over 15 years of business building, buying, and branding experience. And we said to ourselves, how are we going to launch this business? And how can we do something that is interesting, innovative, and that's going to help us, make some cash? And so last year in April, we did a business launch. It took us 3 weeks to launch the business. And what ended up happening was something truly spectacular. It's a case study in scalability, a case study in supply chain management, and a case study in how we look as our partners truly as our family. And I'll give you a bit of the inside scoop. Deirdre came to me, we had a conversation. We said, hey, we need to get this product out there. She was tinkering away on a cloth mask. And I said, hey, I'm a launcher, right? It's my favorite thing. I like to do big stuff. What do we want to do here? Can we launch this business in 2 weeks? She was like, yeah, we can do it in 2 weeks. And I said, great, you focus on product. Let me focus on bringing in the right components to launch this business leanly. I came at this business model with the approach of growing it like a fashion brand. I said, okay, let me put my branding hat on. I know I need a publicist. I know I need a kick-ass website. And I know I need to get my brand story and the copyright. We ended up launching the business in 3 weeks, not 2 weeks, but we were able to launch the business with some press in New York Magazine Strategist and a number of other publications early on. We launched lean. We ended up telling our partners, hey, can we actually pay you half now and half when we actually make some cash? And guess what? They all said yes. They said, you know what? We're willing to help you. We came at it as a partnership agreement. Let's see how well we do. We want to make sure you get paid. And we launched with a very, very lean team. But then all of a sudden, within the first week, we had about $400,000 in sales. There were 4 of us. We were like, oh my God, what do we do? How do we build this business? All of a sudden, the operator in me kicked in. How did we scale this? We went to recruiting agencies. We went into our networks. We had to hire 13 people, which we did so in a matter of 6 weeks. We moved from one third-party logistics center to another in 3 weeks. That was massive. We then had 1 factory to 7 factories in 4 weeks. How did we do that? We tapped into our friends, we tapped into our people, and then we also started to get referrals. We said, hey, who are you using for this type of thing? And we got a lot of conversations going. Now, oftentimes what I find with new business owners is when we get on the phone and we're asking for help or we're vetting people, there tends to be a sense of overcomplicating things. Hey, I'm building this thing and I'm doing this. And there's this over sense of self-importance of, hey, I'm the person who's hiring you. So, I'm going to have this very tops down authoritative approach. That's not what we did at all. In fact, every single business conversation I had was simply, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Here is where we're at. Here is what I need. What can you do? Can you help me? Can this work? And approaching these conversations in a way that was confident, in a way that was laid back, in a way that was very much relationship oriented, really helped us structure to get referrals from people who could not help us, right? But get referrals to people who could help us. And it helped us hire and bring in an amazing group of talent that were able to put their heart and soul into what we did. Now, Deirdre and I were over the moon. We grew from zero to $2 million gross in 6 months. Holy bananas. And then all of a sudden, as we all know, no one's buying face masks anymore. It all stopped. And the entrepreneur in me went, okay, I need to figure out what to do with this business model and what to do with these people, these relationships, this family that I've built in order to be able to not burn bridges. Because I know I'm probably going to launch a few more businesses in my career. Also, as an investor, I'm going to be needing these partners to work with me in other ventures. Just because this business is winding down does not mean that our relationship has to end. So what did I do? I had tough conversations with everybody, again, from a place of authenticity, from a place of compassion, and from a place of deep understanding of where everyone was coming from. We had to lay off 10 people right around the holiday time period. That was very, very difficult. That was not easy. Not a single person who I had the conversation with ended up walking away saying, oh my God, this is so awful, da da da. No, because of the way in which we ran our team and we scaled our team, everyone walked away saying, thank you for this opportunity. They knew it was coming because we had honest and open conversations. And every conversation ended with, hey, when the next thing pops up, please let me know. I would love to work with you again. And as business owners, our goal is to build partnerships so that people want to continue to work with us. It is not about pumping and dumping. We do not want people to come in, negotiate so tough on the contract that they feel like they're not getting anything out of it. And then when things go sour, they don't want to work with us anymore because they're not coming at it from the perspective of collective growth and capacity building. So we worked through some nail biting contracts. It was very difficult, right? We had monthly minimums at our third-party logistics that were $2,000 a month, right? We got rid of those clauses. Why? Because of honest conversations. Our exit clause had a 3-month window, minimum 1 year. We were able to diminish our exit clause entirely. Our insurance had been locked in at $500 a month. Guess what? We got that down to $50 a month. Now, there wasn't anything that I did that was magical, nothing, right? What did I do? I approached business as an authentic leader. I built relationships and I was able to help my partners and my people understand what was happening at every step of the way while steering the ship in a very firm but compassionate manner, right? That is my leadership style. So you might be wondering what's next for this business. Well, my amazing co-founder had a previous business serving the hospitality industry, and we are now in the process of looking at a pivot. How are we going to approach this new industry in hospitality where everything's opening back up, find new partners, new ways of growing this business, and try to do things through a lens of innovation? So it's not simply that we look at capacity building and scaling from the perspective of only getting bigger. We have to scale up and scale down. So managing during COVID, what I think is one of the most interesting things here is I know many of you guys are suffering from, your current supply chain management issues and how you're looking at managing logistics overseas. Now, what's very interesting, and this is something that I think, for Rendell, it's a little bit different. We're focused mostly on domestic manufacturing. But for many of my clients, as they are looking at managing their international supply chain, and this is probably super relevant to most of you, is we have to look at things like managing sourcing from different locations, right? We have to look at things like how do we start to do our future forecasting and projections properly? It's all about these days during this time of COVID, being agile, being nimble, and being able to work flexibly with your partnerships. This past year in retail has been an absolute mayhem when it comes to understanding how we're going to be able to pivot and grow. But keeping an agile frame of work and being able to work collaboratively with your partners and having multiple sources, I believe is ultimately the best way to navigate this storm and, quite honestly, future storms to come. Awesome. All right. Perfect timing, Lori. And I tried to speak as expeditiously as possible.
Well, you did a great job, but I am going to dive right in because we have
Sure.
so many questions. And a lot of questions really are about how do we find the right logistic partners? You know, what are the questions we should be asking when we're vetting these people? Even if we get a referral, what are the questions we should ask when we get them on the phone? Are there any special questions we should be asking during the pandemic, like, that relate to time and delivery, et cetera?
It's a great question. So when it comes to 3PLs, so I'll tell you some of my favorite 3PLs that I know do really great work with smaller businesses. One of my favorites is a 3PL called ShipBob. And what I love about them is you can work with one of their warehouses in one part of the country, and then you can also scale up really quickly through all over the country. And so when we look at kind of these 3PLs, a big question to ask is ultimately, what is your scalability, right? How quickly can you grow with me, right? When it comes to, can you ship things if I don't have barcodes, right? Oftentimes as a smaller brand, we're not getting UPC codes yet, right? We're not quite revved up to be selling to a Macy's or a Nordstrom's. We're probably selling to smaller boutiques. Some of these 3PLs are really designed and geared towards bigger companies, right, that need a lot of these systems and software in place. So what you're looking for are really companies that are going to be able to work with you at your very small scale, right? And saying, can you actually do the packaging the way that I want? And then some of the key things I would look out for that I think are super important are, how much does it cost for that first item to be picked into my order? Right? And then what are the additional costs? I feel like I could do a whole hour on contracts, but what are the additional costs per unit to add to that order? Those are important things because ultimately, as we know, those shipping and handling fees, and these are the handling fees, right? Your 3PL, your handling fees, those are the ones that actually are going to kind of bite you, bless you, they're going to bite you in the tuchus if you're not able to negotiate those early on.
That's great. And I hope everybody had pen and paper for that, because there was a lot of really good information in the answer to that question. Similarly, what do you see are some of the common mistakes that business owners make when they establish a supply chain, and how do they avoid those common mistakes?
So I'd say one of the first common issues is not thinking about it. And then the other common issue is looking at all these partners and almost like, when you know who you have to hire and you've kind of mapped out the organizational plan, it's very important to have conversations with these suppliers and with your organization partnerships that are very relevant to where your business is today and where you want to grow. These are partners. You want to be able to inform them of what your plans are over time, especially if your plans include, hey, I'm starting off selling direct to consumer, so my production cycle is going to be in this way, and my shipping cycle is like this, but actually next year we're planning on growing into selling to retail stores. So all of a sudden, that's going to shift everything. It's going to shift the way in which your logistics and warehousing happens, the nature of those contracts. It's going to shift your entire manufacturing cycle in terms of the lead times for production. So you cannot operate with all of these partnerships assuming the moment you need it, they're going to be able to do it. The more that you can plan ahead and future forecast 12 months out will actually help your partners help you to be able to make the best decisions.
That's great. I once had a conversation with somebody about supply chain, and they said it really just comes down to two words: plan ahead. And but there are all those times when there's things you just can't plan for, which is why I'm going to dig into the chat here. George just said our manufacturing is in India and is currently closed, I'm sure, given what's going on with the pandemic. The state of COVID there is alarming, and we're scared that they won't be able to produce our F21 orders. Any suggestions about pivoting to a new manufacturer at the last minute?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a few things. Number one, you're not the only one. So your retailers, if you're selling to wholesale and you have retail partnerships, your retail partnerships are ultimately dealing with a lot of these same issues on their back end. So you having delays in your product delivery, unfortunately, it's not a you thing, and that's both great and bad. What's good about that is that both on the consumer side and on the retail side, there are going to be leeways of understanding there. Now, unfortunately, what's happened, and we saw this last year, is that manufacturers then have a buildup of orders, right? And so it's very important to take a look at your collection at this moment and ask yourself, what of my collection can I receive and deliver later? Is that going to be seasonal or carryover? What are the opportunities to be able to re-merchandise these pieces? Because at this point in time, shifting over to a new manufacturer is going to be very challenging. You're going to have to go through a whole round of sample making processes, which ultimately might lead to 2 or 3 rounds of sampling, of fitting. My suggestion to all of you who are going through this experience today is something that I told people a couple years ago when we were looking at the negotiations with China, right? And we were looking even at like NAFTA and what changes were going to be made there, which is do not have a single source dependent for your supply chain, for your manufacturing. Even if you choose to manufacture your garments with one manufacturer, it is always great to have backup options of companies that you know you can work with, that you understand their quality, et cetera. And what I would do is once a year, I would have your production manager or yourself go and comp shop for manufacturing and also do another round of searches for 3PLs, right? Do a partnership refresh. What's working, what's not. It's like succession planning, right? You don't know you need the next person until that person leaves and you go, who's going to take over?
Okay. But in that same category of what do you do in, unexpected circumstances, Lisa had a shipment come in with half of the units missing. When they got to her freight forwarder, they know that they were all there by the weight, but somewhere between the freight forwarder and her warehouse, half of these units went missing. What should she do in a situation like that? How should she handle it?
Yeah, so ultimately, when it comes down to quality control, Lisa, I would say the best thing to do is if you have a packing slip from basically your manufacturer owns the goods until you have the goods. So when it comes to ownership of the product, your very first phone call needs to be your manufacturer as soon as you've opened up your packing slip and you did your manual count. But really, it's the checks and balances between them. So when it comes to the terms of ownership, right, you do not actually own the product until it arrives to you. When you open it, then that becomes under your purview. So ultimately, what you want to pick up the conversation with is with your manufacturer. And ultimately, what they might do is they probably won't refund you anything, right? But you hopefully will be able to get a credit onto your future production.
Great, thank you. So a lot of the entrepreneurs on today are new, and they're saying, how do you kind of balance? Because you talked a lot about relationships with your suppliers. How do you balance that? We have virtually no money, and I have to be a tough negotiator with this is someone I'm trying to build a relationship with. Talk a little bit about that push-pull.
Yeah, that's great. Honesty. So when I get on the phone and I have no money, I say, I have no money and this is what I want to do. And this is my vision. And I understand how much you charge and I understand your value. And I would very much like to pay that, but I can't. And so what might you be able to do for me so that we can start to build this relationship to hopefully get me to a place where I can get there. And what you'll find is that these smaller companies that are actually the right for you to work with. Remember, we're not looking to have you walk into a huge company, right? You want to work with businesses that understand your pain points and that can grow with you. So honesty is important, and obviously some very simple things, right? So you obviously want to quote your budget about 30 or 50% less than you can, because negotiations are all about having, you want to, I bet about 50% less than what you can pay. You want to get their quote first. So these are kind of simple negotiation tactics. Tell them, hey, I'm getting some quotes right now. Can you just give me an idea of your pricing? I need to go back and review everything. Get the quotes, right? Take a look at what you were going to spend, but whatever these quotes are, start to index all of the quotes together. Take a look at how you can ultimately maybe pull a few different proposals into one dream proposal that you then re-pitch to the service provider that you want to work with. So it's not just cutting dollars, it's also getting more services added, right? That is also a huge win. So people sometimes think just in terms of the dollars, but if you can consolidate things together, that is a huge, huge win. So I would always say you have about 50% less budget than you do. And then I would also get quotes first, and then I would consolidate proposals, repitch them to the service partner you think, say your budget's 50% less, see what they can do, and then ultimately on the next round of conversations, come to an agreement. Your goal here is to pay about, I would say, 20 to 30% less than you thought you would, if not paying what you thought you would.
That's great. There are so many questions about sourcing, and I know you have touched on all this already, but if you could just reiterate some of the best sources for sourcing, both domestically and especially internationally.
Great. So domestically, I would say, sourcing is so big. So, okay. So if you are sourcing, and I don't know if Magic yet is coming back to Vegas this summer. I know everything is kind of in the air with trade shows, but sourcing at Magic.
Wait, can you say what Magic is? Because some of our folks.
Oh, yes. Of course. Thanks, Lori. So Magic is a fairly large trade show that happens in Vegas about 2 times a year. And at Magic, you actually have one of the largest assortments of not just brands that are showing to be able to sell to retailers across multiple categories, but you also have an entire section of Magic that's called sourcing. And at sourcing, what you have in there is a fantastic assortment of not only fabric suppliers, right? You also have the people who you're going to buy your packaging from. You're also going to have people in there who have private label garments. You might also have people in there who are representing supply chain management software systems, like I mentioned, Ames 360 or Apparel Magic. You might also have in there some manufacturers who are showing. And what I love about sourcing is that it brings a global audience that you would never be able to find online into one place. And even if sourcing is not available in terms of walking the show, what's fantastic is the majority of trade shows that focus on sourcing have put everything online. So the capacity for you to actually go onto the sourcing portion of Magic and look at who the vendors are who are showing gives you a great opportunity to start to research from there. So I would say go to the trade shows for their directories as opposed to just blank SEO searching.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure there must even be collateral material from past conferences that maybe folks can access. Is that the case?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you'll be able to find those partners because ultimately these trade shows, their whole point is to connect all the vendors with all of us, right? So we can find them. So you can even reach out to Magic, to their customer service team and say, hey, I'm looking for these kinds of vendors, right? And it is to their benefit to connect you with the vendors that showcase at the show that could be a good fit. That's a great hack.
That's great. So preparation, there's some questions saying, what if you have delays? How do you manage that? How do you pivot? How do you deal with the customers if you have delays in your supply chain?
Absolutely. So at the beginning of the pandemic, USPS had the biggest fallout of shipping. In fact, thousands of orders of mine got lost. It was a huge customer service nightmare, and it ended up being a huge ding in terms of the P&L. Now, what do you do, right? In that case, when you want to supply your customer. So if you're having issues with the logistics, right, with UPS, with USPS, as a small business, your goal is ultimately to send the product to the customer, right? So you're going to lose on the back end for that. It is very difficult to get those claims approved. So you're going to kind of eat the loss, unfortunately, when it comes to your P&L, when it comes to that missing gap, right, between shipping the product and getting it to the consumer. Now, delays on manufacturing, let's say outside of COVID related, but delays on manufacturing are actually just oftentimes quite natural, and most people who are new to the industry, who maybe launched within the last year are seeing COVID as a impediment, but ultimately I have yet to meet a single brand that has not had issues with shipping delays, that has not had issues with things slowing down at manufacturing. So it is important to understand that part of this game is the larger your networks are, the larger the orchestra is that you as the CEO are conducting. And it is hard to make sure that all those instruments play on time. Over time, as your business grows, the music is beautiful and everything plays together. But know that these kinds of delays are totally natural, right? And it is something that unfortunately you can't always plan. What I would suggest is always clear communication to your consumer. Never feel ashamed of things being delayed from your manufacturer. Communicate with your email list on social. Let people know what's going on. We are in the advent of the, CEO celebrity. Small businesses that have CEOs that are front facing of their companies have the most customer retention and customer loyalty. If something goes awry, communicate. You're going to build loyalty, trust, and people are going to have a lot more faith in your product.
That's great. Just quickly, a lot of questions about Magic. So Magic is a trade show. What should people Google to get more information about the trade show or the past collateral materials?
Yes. So I would take a look at, so I would take a Google, and so I'm not Googling because I'm on the Zoom, but I would take a look at, I would Google sourcing. So Magic, sourcing, vendors. You should see a full list because they will list everyone. I would suggest ultimately, instead of spending hours on this, quite honestly, guys, and I'm sure Magic, these guys are gonna get like 1,000 emails now. I would quite literally just write them and say, hey, I'm looking for these kinds of sources. Can you help connect me to companies that are going to work with businesses of my size? And I would give them a laundry list and I would ask them to do the heavy lifting for you. But Magic itself will have a list of all of the vendors, and they may actually have a PDF of the trade show layout in terms of the vendor listing, organized by category, right? So these are the people for all your paper products, fabrics, etc. Other places to look at, obviously, would be there's a trade show called Text World, which is also a really good textile sourcing. You also have Premier Vision, which happens in Paris, which is also really good for sourcing. So there are quite a few and when it comes to doing this. But I do know, guys, these trade shows exist to serve you. So juice them, right? Because that actually is very beneficial.
That's a great point. But are these all domestic to the United States? We have somebody from Nairobi with us and said, can I use Magic?
Yes, everyone can. Because Magic and all of these trade shows pull in vendors internationally. So they're all using international, the domestic vendors at sourcing shows are quite limited, guys. I mean, we all know that there's been a huge shortage of domestic manufacturing, which is quite difficult. When you look at certainly labor markets and things like that, it is challenging to scale up your entire business model in a high profit manner using everything that is produced domestically. So chances are you're going to be sourcing internationally. But Magic is obviously their website gives you a lot of information no matter where you are in the world. But that trade show is in Vegas historically. And so I'd say anyone can hop on a plane, hopefully pretty soon, and be able to attend.
Great. Thank you so much, Shama. You've just been extraordinary. And